Ukraine says Russia's latest attack on a maternity and children's hospital is more evidence war crimes are being committed. Some of the images we're about to show you, I want to let you know, are disturbing. This is in Mariupol. The first image, a massive bomb crater right in front of the hospital. 17 people were injured in this attack, according to local authorities. Ukraine's president is repeating his call on NATO to close the skies over Ukraine, but allies are saying no.
Introducing, in our case, American service members in Ukraine, on Ukrainian territory or soil, or American pilots into Ukrainian airspace, whether on a full or on a limited basis, would almost certainly lead to direct conflict between the United States, between NATO, and Russia.
Retired General Tom Lawson served as chief of the defense staff from 2012 to 2015. He's now president of Thomas J. Lawson and Associates. That company provides strategic consulting services for the Canadian Armed Forces and Lockheed Martin Canada. General Lawson joins us here in Ottawa. Good to see you, as always. Pleasure to have you back on the program. Look, General Lawson, I could see a picture of you out of the corner of my eye as I was reading about that attack on the maternity ward in Ukraine. You were shaking your head. What is going through your mind as you're watching and hearing about some of these attacks?
Well, it's of course heartbreaking, Vashi, and I think that NATO 2 weeks ago made very clear to Russia that if they attacked Ukraine, stepped across the border, they would not meet NATO troops. Now, whether or not that was a good thing to put up front is certainly is under debate now. But they also made it very clear that they would face tremendous sanctions. But the assumption that went behind that stance for NATO was that Russia, in whatever they did in Ukraine, would follow the rules of war, and they haven't. And this afternoon, we see yet another example of the targeting of civilians. This is a war crime. It breaks all conventions they've got. So, I think we may see that NATO has to rethink that set of assumptions and therefore how they go forward with Russia.
That's a really interesting point, and I did want to ask you, from based on your experience. I earlier in the program, and the full interview will air later on next hour. But I spoke to envoys from 4 NATO countries here, and they're pretty united in their argument that, and it makes sense, I think, to a lot of people, that look, if you start shooting down Russian airplanes, like, we are basically in World War III, and as a result, more people, it's terrible that even people, the number of people in Ukraine are being hurt or killed or wounded, but even more people will suffer that same fate if we were to engage in that kind of escalatory behavior. Your response to that?
Yeah, exactly so. If you were on the ground in Ukraine right now, in the government, in the military, or one of the people who's suffering this Russian action, the situation really doesn't appear it could get any worse. NATO decision makers, however, need to take into consideration how much worse things actually could get across Europe if, in fact, a miscalculation is made on either side, and NATO ends up going to war against Russia. And while they're seeing all the same heartbreaking items on the news that we're seeing, and a whole lot more from their intelligence, this is the calculus that they've got to work with, and they don't want to get it wrong.
What about the sort of suggestion that has unfolded over the past few days where fighter jets or aircraft are concerned? And that is the idea put forth by Poland that they would send some warplanes vis-a-vis the NATO U.S. base in Germany, and then the U.S. could backstop that with Poland. It was really shot down yesterday evening, and then further today by the State Department as well, saying, like, this is, the best way to support Ukraine is instead through weapons and systems they need most. Adding aircraft wouldn't significantly change the effectiveness of the Ukrainian Air Force relative to Russian capabilities, and it may be mistaken, this is according to the State Department, as escalatory and could result in significant Russian reaction that might increase the prospects of military escalation with NATO. What are your thoughts on that proposition put forth by, sorry, that was through the Pentagon, my apologies, not the State Department, but what are your thoughts on the proposition put forward by Poland and that reaction from the Pentagon?
Well, I think we're missing some of the story here. The administration of this transfer suggested by Poland was really kind of complicated. The aircraft, the MiG-29 Falcons, would head to an American-based Ramstein in Germany and then be delivered forward into Ukraine. It's not clear why that was a requirement put forward by Poland, but largely it may have been that Poland was trying to keep their hands clean too. At the end of the day, I think there probably is a way to supply these fighters directly from Poland to Ukraine, and I think there's a good chance it will happen. But I think this is another example of the calculus, the very cleared and cold light of day calculus that United States and most senior decision makers in NATO have to go through to make sure a miscalculation isn't made on Putin's side.
As far as the contributions we are making, and you would know about Canada's capabilities, more than certainly me and more than most, the amount of lethal aid, for example, that we've been supplying, and that our allies have as well. How much assistance will that provide? Because we have seen, probably a larger than expected resistance by the Ukrainian military.
Yeah, no, it's critical. Actually, the manned pads, the shoulder-held surface-to-air missiles that have gone forward, the anti-tank javelins, the Carl Gustavs that are on their way in. This stuff is all critical. The material that was given in recent years, rifles, bullets, all the armament and everything, including the training that Canadians were part of providing over recent years, have all brought the Ukrainian military to a level and standard that maybe doesn't surprise the West too much, but has certainly surprised Putin and his campaign planners. So it's critical that those supply lines remain open, and NATO has set clear that this will remain open and that those lines can't be threatened by Russia. Russia, I think, accepted that without too much concern weeks ago, because they really didn't think it was going to matter. I think they thought this was going to be a much easier campaign than what it was. It's very difficult now to say that, in fact, is a red line for us, because it's been a supply line that's been open from the very start.
I just have a few seconds left, but I wanted to get your take on whether you think it's enough to sustain the resistance. Do you think Ukrainians can ultimately be successful with the tools that they currently have at their disposal?
It's an open question. It depends how long this conflict goes on. I think the longer it goes on, the more it tilts in favor of Russia meeting whatever and they're looking for. And yet, the longer it goes on, the tougher position Putin and his military is in too. The reason I say it's an open question is it's difficult to know which line is going to snap first. Okay,
General Lawson, I'll leave it there. Appreciate your analysis as always.
Thank you.
Retired General Tom Lawson, former Chief of Defense Staff for the Canadian military. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.